He parked in my driveway and waited for my wife like I didn't exist. She walked past me, took his hand, and told me to go back inside. I didn't go back inside. That's when I snapped, and everything changed. My name is Conrad Ellison. I'm 47 years old. I'm a fire marshal for Hargrove County, and I spent 16 years married to a woman who used our son's absence as a calendar for her affair. I didn't know any of that on the night. It all blew up. That Friday in October, I came home from a 12-hour shift smelling like smoke and paperwork. I was hungry. I was tired. The last thing I expected when I pulled into the driveway was to find a black Audi parked halfway across my lawn like it belonged there. I didn't recognize the car. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine idling, trying to place it. Then the front door opened, and Colette walked out. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. Deep burgundy fitted. Her hair was done. Her makeup was perfect, and she moved with an energy I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She didn't notice me right away. She was looking toward the Audi, smiling, already somewhere else in her mind. I stepped out of the truck. She stopped when she saw me. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not guilt, not quite. More like irritation. "Conrad," she said, "you're home early." "It's 6:30, I replied. "Same time I'm always home." The driver's door of the Audi opened, and a man climbed out. Mid-40s, good-looking in a practiced sort of way, dressed like he'd just come from a wine tasting. He stood at the edge of my driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets like he owned the place. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just waited. "Who is that?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer wasn't going to be something I liked. "His name is Spencer," Colette said. Like that answered anything. I walked toward him slowly, not running, not yelling, just walking, the way I do when I'm checking a building I already know is compromised. "You need to leave," I said to him. Quiet, direct. Spencer glanced at Colette. Not at me, at her. Like I was a minor inconvenience he was waiting for her to handle. That told me everything. "Conrad, stop." Colette moved between us, which wasn't what I expected. She stepped right past me, walked straight to Spencer, and took his hand. Not a subtle thing. Not an accident. She laced her fingers through his and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen on her before. Calm, almost defiant. "Go back inside," she said. 3 words. Go back inside. Like I was a child being sent to his room. Like this was her driveway, her house, her rules, and I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Something shifted in me right then. Not rage. I've been around enough real emergencies to know rage is useless. What shifted was clarity. The fog I'd been living in for the past couple of years, the distance, the excuses, the late nights she said were work. It all burned off in about 4 seconds. I didn't go back inside. I looked at Spencer. Then I looked at Colette. Then I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and called my attorney, Dale Whitmore, right there in the driveway while she watched. It rang twice. "Dale," I said when he picked up. "It's Conrad. I need to meet with you first thing Monday." "It's time." Colette's expression changed then. The defiance slipped just a little. I ended the call, walked past both of them, and went into my house. I locked the door behind me. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started pulling up our joint bank accounts. Because I was a fire marshal, and my job was finding what was about to go wrong before it became a disaster. I was done being late to the scene. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat at the kitchen table until past midnight with my laptop open and a legal pad beside me, going through every joint account we had, checking, savings, the home equity line. I'm not a financial investigator, but I'm methodical. It's what makes me good at my job. You document everything, you follow the evidence, and you don't let what you want to be true get in the way of what actually is. What actually was turned out to be ugly. Over the past 14 months, Colette had been making regular transfers out of our joint savings, amounts between $600 and $1,400, always spaced 3 to 4 weeks apart. Never round numbers, which was smart. Round numbers catch the eye. These were the kind of figures that looked like grocery runs or car maintenance or any 100 things a wife might spend money on without her husband questioning it. The total, when I added it up twice to make sure, came to just over $19,000. I stared at that number for a long time. She hadn't gone anywhere with it. At least not anywhere I could see. No big purchases showed up. No hotel charges. No jewelry. No airfare. Which meant it was likely going somewhere in cash. or somewhere with a name I wouldn't recognize. I wrote down every transaction date, every amount, and set it aside. Then I opened a new browser tab and found Dale Whitmore's after-hours voicemail. I left him a message laying out the basics, separation, financials, custody, and asked him to call me first thing Monday. Then I did the thing I've been putting off. I called Ridgemont Academy. It was late, so I left a message for the school administrator, a man named Paul Greer I'd spoken with maybe 3 times total since Caden enrolled. I asked him to call me back. I said it was about my son's weekend schedule. He called the next morning at 8:15. The conversation started politely enough. Paul Greer was a careful man, the kind who chooses his words like he's diffusing something. But when I asked him directly how often Caden had been picked up on weekends over the past school year, the pause before he answered lasted just a beat too long. "Mr. Ellison," he said carefully, "Caden is a wonderful student. He's adjusted well." "That's not what I asked," I told him. Another pause. Then, quietly, "Your son has remained on campus most weekends this year. There were several occasions when he requested to go home, and we reached out to Mrs. Ellison. She indicated there were family circumstances that made pickup difficult." I kept my voice steady. "How many weekends?" "Since September. I'd estimate 11 or 12. 11 or 12 weekends." My 14-year-old boy had sat in a dormitory room while his mother told the school she was too busy to get him, and I hadn't known because I assumed she was handling it. I assumed she was his mother. I thanked Paul Greer, hung up, and sat quietly in my truck in the driveway for about 10 minutes. Then I drove to Ridgemont. Not to pull Caden out, not yet, not without a plan, but because I needed to see my son. I signed in at the front office, and they sent someone to get him from his Saturday study hall. I waited in a small meeting room with a round table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto a soccer field. Caden walked in and stopped when he saw me. He was taller than I remembered. Kids do that when you're not watching closely enough. He'd gotten a haircut I didn't recognize. He looked older than 14, and that hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. "Dad." He looked confused, then something else moved across his face. Relief, maybe. The kind of kid tries to hide because he doesn't want to seem like he needs it. "What are you doing here?" "Came to see you," I said. "Sit down." He sat. I didn't launch into anything heavy. He was a kid, and whatever was happening between me and Colette wasn't his to carry. We talked for almost an hour. About school, about his friends in the dorm, about a history project he was working on. Normal things. But then, near the end, he went quiet for a moment. He was looking at the table. Then he said, without looking up, "Mom hasn't come in a while." "I know," I said. I kept thinking maybe she was just busy. He shrugged, the way teenagers do when they're trying to act like something doesn't matter when it clearly does. I didn't want to call and make a big deal out of it. I reached across the table and put my hand on his shoulder. "That's not on you," I told him. "None of it." He nodded. Didn't say anything else about it. When I left, I sat in my truck in the school parking lot and pulled up Colette's iPad. She'd linked it to our shared family account years ago, back when we still did things like that. I'd never looked at her messages. Hadn't felt the need to. I felt the need now. It took me about 4 minutes to find what I was looking for. A thread with a contact saved simply as SR. Spencer Rowe, I assumed. The messages went back nearly 2 years. Most of it I skimmed past. But near the beginning of the thread, one exchange stopped me cold. Her message, dated the same week she'd first brought up Ridgemont Academy. "Once he's settled in, we'll finally have real time together. Not just stolen hours." His reply, "Can't wait." I read it twice. Then I photographed every page of that thread, closed the app, and set the iPad face down on the passenger seat. She hadn't put Caden in that school for his future. She'd put him there for her convenience. I drove home slowly, thinking about what came next. Not what I felt. I'd have time to feel things later. Right now, I needed to think. I needed to be the guy who reads the scene before the scene reads him. Monday morning, I was sitting in Dale Whitmore's office when it opened at 8. Dale Whitmore had been practicing family law in Hardrow County for 31 years. He was the kind of attorney who didn't waste your time with sympathy. He listened, he organized, and he told you exactly where you stood. I'd referred 2 colleagues to him over the years when their marriages fell apart. I never thought I'd be sitting across from him myself. I laid everything out in order. The driveway confrontation, the bank records, the school administrator's account of Caden's missed weekends. The messages I'd photographed on Colette's iPad. Dale took notes without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated about him. When I finished, he set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. The financial transfers are significant, he said. 14 months, consistent pattern, no corresponding expenses. That's going to be relevant in the asset division discussion. The school records are potentially even more valuable for custody. That's where I want to focus, I told him. Caden stays with me. Dale nodded slowly. We'll need the school's documentation. I'll request it formally this week. In the meantime, don't move out of the house, don't make any large financial moves, and don't confront her about the iPad. Let her believe you don't have it. I told him I understood. Then I drove directly from his office to Ridgemont Academy. I hadn't called ahead this time. I pulled into the visitor lot, walked into the front office, signed the log, and asked them to pull Caden from his morning class. Paul Greer himself came out to meet me in the hallway. I got the impression Doris had already briefed him on my call from the weekend. Mr. Ellison, he said, extending his hand. I expected you might come in. I appreciate your honesty on the phone, I told him. I'd like to take my son home for a few days, if that's permitted. Of course. He can take his coursework with him. His teachers can email assignments. They brought Caden down 10 minutes later. He had his backpack half-packed and a look on his face that was equal parts puzzled and hopeful. The look of a kid who didn't want to get excited about something in case it didn't pan out. You taking me home? He asked. Yeah, I said. Come on. We didn't talk much on the drive. I had the radio on low, one of those classic rock stations that plays the same 40 songs in rotation, and Caden stared out the passenger window at the trees going by. About 40 minutes in, he said, without turning his head, Dad, I need to tell you something. Go ahead. He was quiet for another few seconds. Then, last spring, when you were on that job in Millbrook for 3 weeks, Mom had someone at the house. A few times. I saw his car. She told me he was a contractor. Something about the back deck. I kept my eyes on the road. Did you believe her? A beat. No. Why didn't you say anything? He turned to look at me then. Because I thought if I told you, you'd fight. And then one of you would leave. And then He stopped. Looked back out the window. I didn't want to be the reason. I pulled off onto the shoulder. Just stopped the truck, engine running, hazards off, on the side of a Tulane County road with trees on both sides. I turned to face him. Caden, look at me. He did. None of this is your fault. Not one single piece of it. You hear me? He nodded. His jaw was tight the way teenage boys hold it when they're trying not to show something. And you are never, not ever, the reason adults make the choices they make. That's not how it works. He nodded again, slower this time. Then he said, quietly, Dad, did she love us? Or was she just waiting for something better? That question sat in the cab of that truck like a stone. I didn't have an easy answer, and I wasn't going to insult him with one. I think she loved us in the beginning, I said finally. And then she got lost somewhere along the way. That's on her, not on you. He didn't say anything after that, but when I pulled back onto the road, he reached over and turned the radio up just a little. That was enough. Back at the house, Colette was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway, which was fine by me. I got Caden settled in his room, ordered pizza for dinner, and spent the evening watching old action movies with my son on the couch. Normal things. Things I should have had more of. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and called Kurt Dorsey. Kurt had been my closest friend since we were both rookies at the county fire department, back when neither of us knew what we were doing. He'd retired 2 years ago, bad knee, moved out to a place on Kellerman Lake. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear the television in the background. You sound like something's on fire, he said. In a manner of speaking, I told him. I gave him the short version. He listened without interrupting, which wasn't typical for Kurt. He was usually a talker. When I finished, he said, Conrad, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it straight. Go ahead. I saw Spencer Rowe at the 4th of July thing at the Hendersons last summer. He and Colette were talking, long enough that I noticed. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be wrong. I should have said something. I stared at the ceiling. Yeah, you should have. I know. A pause. What do you need from me? Right now? Nothing. But I may need a character witness down the road. Done, he said. No hesitation. Whatever you need. I thanked him and hung up. Then I checked on Caden one more time. He was asleep, one arm hanging off the side of the bed the way he'd always slept since he was small. I stood in the doorway for a moment. He'd carried that secret for the better part of a year, all by himself, trying to protect the family. 14 years old. I closed his door quietly and went back to work. 2 days after Caden came home, Colette returned. She came through the front door on a Tuesday evening with 2 grocery bags and an expression designed to project normalcy, like the scene in the driveway hadn't happened, like everything was simply paused and waiting for her to resume it. She stopped when she saw Caden at the kitchen table doing homework, and something shifted behind her eyes. "You're home," she said to him. "Dad picked me up," Caden replied, not looking up from his work. She looked at me. I was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, watching her process it. "We should talk," she said. "We should," I agreed. "Caden, go finish that in your room for a bit, would you?" He gathered his books without argument and disappeared down the hallway. Colette set the grocery bags on the counter and turned to face me. She had her composure arranged carefully. I'd seen her do this in arguments before, building the wall before the first word was fired. "I want to explain," she started. "I'm going to stop you there," I said calmly. "I'm not interested in an explanation. I'm interested in an agreement." She blinked. An agreement. Simple terms. No fighting in front of Caden. No disruption to his routine while this gets sorted out. "And I'd like you to talk to Dale Whitmore's office this week about scheduling." Her composure slipped just enough. "You already called a lawyer." "First thing Monday," I confirmed. "Dale Whitmore. You've met him. He spoke at the county safety dinner 2 years ago." She was quiet for a moment, recalculating. Then she said, carefully, "Conrad, I think if we just sat down and talked about this like adults, we could. I'd also like to resolve the question of the joint savings account," I said. $19,000 over 14 months. I have the dates and amounts written down if you'd like to go over them." The color shifted in her face. Not dramatically. Colette was good at controlling her surface. But I've been watching that face for 16 years, and I saw it. That money went to Spencer Rowe, I said. Or to things that benefited Spencer Rowe. That's what my attorney believes, and based on what I've found, I'm inclined to agree with him. She set her hands flat on the counter. "You don't have proof of that." "I have enough," I said simply. What happened next was the part I'd expected but still found instructive to watch. She pivoted. Colette had always been good at pivoting. When one angle didn't work, she found another without breaking stride. "I want to talk about Caden," she said, shifting her tone toward something softer. "I know I haven't been. I know the school situation wasn't ideal. But I think we can work something out that's best for him." "So do I said. "That's why I've already asked Dale to request the weekend log from Ridgemont. 11 missed weekends, Colette. Paul Greer will testify to that if it comes to it." That landed differently. She straightened slightly, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked something close to genuinely rattled. "That's not. I had reasons." "I'm sure you did," I said. I kept my voice even, almost pleasant. "You can share those reasons with the mediator." She stared at me for a long moment. I could see her working through it. How much I knew, how much I might be bluffing, what her next move should be. This was the version of Colette I'd underestimated for too long. Sharp, strategic, always running 3 steps ahead. The difference now was that I was running ahead too. "I'd like you to stay in the guest room for now," I said, "until we have something formal in place. I think that's better for Caden than one of us moving out." She picked up her purse from the counter. "I need to make a call." "Of course," I said. She went upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close. Our bedroom, I supposed, until it wasn't anymore. Then I heard her voice through the ceiling, low and tense, which meant she was calling her attorney. Her attorney was a woman named Kristen Farlow. What Colette didn't know yet, what would come out in the first formal exchange between counsel, was that Kristen Farlow had known about the affair. She had provided Colette with an alibi on at least 2 documented occasions, telling mutual friends that Colette had been with her on evenings when she'd actually been with Spencer. That was a conflict of interest. Dale had already identified it. He was waiting for the right moment to surface it. I refilled my coffee, knocked on Caden's door, and asked if he wanted to watch something after dinner. He did. We watched 2 episodes of an old survival show he'd gotten into, and he fell asleep on the couch before the second one ended. I turned the television off and sat in the quiet. The trap had been set. Colette had walked into it, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Kurt Dorsey drove out from Kellerman Lake on a Thursday afternoon. He showed up unannounced, which was typical of him. Kurt operated on his own schedule and had for as long as I'd known him. He knocked twice, walked in when I opened the door, and headed straight for the kitchen like he'd been there yesterday instead of 4 months ago. "Got any real coffee?" he asked, opening the cabinet above the machine. "Second shelf," I said. He found the bag, measured it out by eye, and started the pot without being asked. I sat down at the table. There was something almost stabilizing about the ordinariness of it. Kurt in my kitchen, making coffee like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. He brought 2 mugs over and sat across from me. "Tell me where things stand." I laid it out. Dale Whitmore was moving on the financial records. The school documentation was in. Kristen Farlow, Colette's attorney, had been formally flagged for the conflict of interest, and Dale expected her to withdraw from the case within the week. Colette was sleeping in the guest room and moving through the house like she was waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what she thought was coming. Kurt listened to all of it, turning his mug slowly on the table. When I finished, he said, "You're holding up better than I expected. I don't have the luxury of falling apart." I told him. "Caden's here." He nodded. "How's he doing?" "Better than he should be," I said. "He's a tough kid, tougher than I gave him credit for." Kurt was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing I could tell he'd been holding since we'd spoken on the phone. "Conrad, you asked me why I didn't tell you about Roe at the Henderson party. I've been thinking about that. And I've been telling myself I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure. But that's not the whole truth." He set his mug down. "The whole truth is that I figured you were happy, that things were good, and I didn't want to be the one to blow that up based on a hunch. That was selfish of me. It was easier for me to stay quiet." I looked at him across the table. Kurt wasn't a man who admitted things easily. He'd spent 30 years in the fire service, which doesn't exactly cultivate emotional flexibility. This cost him something. "I hear you," I said, "and I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry about it. But you're here now. That counts for something." He let out a long breath. "What do you need from me? I may need you to speak to what you've seen in this house. As a friend, as someone who's known us both. Dale thinks character context could matter for the custody argument." "Done," Kurt said. "You don't even have to ask." We drank the coffee. He stayed 2 hours, and we talked about other things for most of it. His late property, a wildfire situation out west he'd been following on the news, Caden's interest in engineering that had come up at dinner the night before. Normal conversation. The kind I hadn't had in longer than I realized. After he left, I sat with what he'd said about not wanting to blow things up. I understood it, even if it frustrated me. People don't want to be the messenger. Nobody wants to carry that into a friendship and watch it land. But it also made me think about the question Caden had asked in the truck, whether she had loved us, or whether she'd just been waiting for something better. I didn't have a clean answer. What I had was a clearer picture of how long things had been broken without me seeing it. A man who'd shown up at 4th of July parties. A pattern of transfers that went back 14 months. Weekends when my son sat in a dormitory because his mother had better things to do. At some point that evening, Colette came downstairs. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching me read through documents at the table. "Is Caden asleep?" she asked. "About an hour ago," I said. She came in and poured herself a glass of water, stood at the counter with her back partly to me. Then she said, quietly, "I know you're not going to believe this, but I didn't plan for it to get here." I kept my eyes on the papers in front of me. "Where did you plan for it to get?" Silence. "You put our son in a boarding school so you'd have more time with another man," I said. Not loud, not heated, just factual. "That was a plan, Colette. It just didn't end the way you expected." She didn't respond. She finished her water, set the glass in the sink, and went back upstairs. I sat there another hour, going through documents, waiting for nothing in particular. The house was quiet. Caden was asleep down the hall. I thought about what I told Kurt, that I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. That was true. But it was also true that somewhere under the discipline and the documentation and the legal strategy, there was a man who had loved his wife for 16 years and was only now understanding that the person he'd loved had been gone for a long time without telling him. I let that sit for exactly 60 seconds. Then I turned the page and kept working. The first custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks after Dale Whitmore had filed the initial petition. The courtroom was small and functional, the kind of room designed to handle the wreckage of families without any decoration to soften it. Judge Patricia Odom presided, and from the moment she walked in, it was clear she was not interested in drama. Colette arrived with her new attorney, a man named Gary Flemish who'd taken the case after Kristen Farlow withdrew. Flemish was younger than Dale, polished, with an expensive suit and the slightly impatient energy of someone who expected to win. He opened by establishing Colette as the primary caregiver during Caden's early years. Accurate, as far as it went. She had been present, engaged, involved. Dale let him finish. Then he put Paul Greer on the stand. The Ridgemont Academy administrator was calm and precise. He brought printed records, the school's official weekend log, time-stamped entries for every request, and cancellation going back to the beginning of the school year. He confirmed that Caden had been left on campus 11 of 14 available weekends since September. He confirmed that on multiple occasions, Caden had asked whether his mother had called. He confirmed that Mrs. Ellison's responses to school outreach had cited unspecified family circumstances. Flemish cross-examined efficiently, trying to establish that the missed weekends were isolated and not indicative of a pattern. Paul Greer answered each question the same way, by referring to the printed record. Numbers don't editorialize. Then Dale called me. I've been in enough official proceedings in my career, fire investigations, liability hearings, code enforcement cases, to know how to sit in a witness chair. You answer what's asked. You don't volunteer. You stay level. Dale walked me through the sequence of events. The driveway confrontation, the call to Ridgemont, the discovery of the financial transfers, the visit to recover Caden, the conversation with my son in the truck. I answered in plain language, the way I'd write an incident report. When Flemish took over, he tried a different angle. Mr. Ellison, he said, isn't it true that your work schedule as a county fire marshal frequently takes you away from home for extended hours? My schedule is consistent and predictable, I said. I've been home by 7 most evenings for the past 11 years. My son's school records reflect no absences, no disciplinary issues, and consistent parental engagement on my part. And yet you chose to enroll him in a boarding school. My wife chose to enroll him in a boarding school, I said. I had reservations. I deferred to her. I won't make that mistake again. Flemish paused. He'd expected either defensiveness or deflection. I'd given him neither. Judge Odom asked a few questions directly about Caden's current living arrangement, about his academic standing, about whether he'd expressed a preference. Dale had already submitted a brief statement from a family counselor who'd met with Caden twice in the past 2 weeks. The statement noted that Caden had expressed a clear preference to remain with his father and a desire to transfer to a local school. The judge didn't rule that day. She rarely did in first hearings. But she ordered a formal guardian ad litem review and requested additional documentation from school. In the hallway afterward, Dale was measured but direct. That went well. Greer was solid. Your testimony was clean. Flemish didn't land anything. And Colette? I asked. She'll have her turn to testify at the next hearing. Flemish will prepare her. He paused. There's also something you should know. The financial filing, the asset dissipation claim, has been picked up by her employer's compliance department. I received a call this morning. They're conducting an internal review. I'd expected this eventually. How does that affect us? It doesn't change our case, Dale said, but it changes her position considerably. A financial misconduct review at her workplace, combined with the custody situation, is going to put significant pressure on her to settle rather than continue litigating. I nodded. We walked out into the cold November air, and I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. Across the parking lot, Colette was getting into a car with Flemish, speaking in low tones, not looking in my direction. She had 2 years of planning. She'd arranged the school, managed the money, kept her double life running smoothly. She was intelligent and careful, and she genuinely believed she was ahead of it. What she hadn't accounted for was that the man she'd been managing all that time was someone who found things for a living. I drove home to my son. Colette's parents drove up from Knoxville on a Saturday morning in mid-November. I hadn't called them. She had. But I knew they were coming because Caden mentioned it at breakfast, which meant Colette had told him without telling me first. Small move. The kind designed to make me feel like the outsider in my own house. I didn't react to it. I made eggs, poured coffee, and when Leonard and Barbara Voss pulled into the driveway at 10:15 in their burgundy Buick, I walked out to meet them. Leonard was 71, a retired civil engineer, a man who built things for a living and had strong opinions about how they should hold together. Barbara was 68, softer in manner but sharper in observation than most people gave her credit for. I'd always gotten along with both of them. That made this harder. Leonard shook my hand. His grip was firm, the same as always. He held a beat longer than usual and looked at me steadily. Conrad, he said. Leonard. Barbara. I nodded to her. Come inside. We sat in the living room, all four of us, plus Caden, who said hello and then quietly disappeared to his room the way teenagers do when they sense things are complicated. Colette sat on the far end of the couch. I sat in the armchair. Leonard and Barbara took the two seats across from us like they were refereeing something. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Leonard leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Conrad, he said, I'd like to hear what happened from you. Directly. Colette started to speak. Leonard held up one hand without looking at her. I asked Conrad. I gave him the facts. Not all of them. I left out the financial details and the legal proceedings because that wasn't their business. But I told them about the driveway, about what I'd found regarding Caden and the missed weekends, about where things stood between Colette and me. I kept my voice even. I wasn't there to prosecute their daughter in front of them. When I finished, Leonard sat back. He looked at Colette. Is what he said accurate? She was quiet for a moment. It's complicated. I didn't ask if it was complicated, Leonard said. I asked if it was accurate. Another silence. Then Colette said quietly, in the broad strokes, yes. Barbara hadn't said a word yet. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Not hostile, not sympathetic, just taking everything in. Leonard exhaled slowly. We're not going to take sides in this, he said. You're both adults. Whatever happened between you is yours to resolve. He paused. But I want to say something, and I'm saying it in front of both of you, so there's no confusion later. He looked at me. You've been a good son-in-law, Conrad. And from what I can see, you're being a good father right now. I respect that. Then he looked at his daughter. He didn't say anything to her for a moment. Just looked. Whatever passed between them in that silence, I wasn't part of it. Then he stood up, signaled to Barbara, and said they'd like to see Caden before they headed to the hotel. They stayed for 2 hours. I gave them space with Caden, used the time to go through paperwork in the kitchen. When they left, Barbara paused at the front door and put her hand briefly on my arm. Take care of that boy, she said. That's the plan, I told her. That night, after the house went quiet, Colette knocked on the kitchen doorframe. She stood there with her arms folded. My father respects you, she said. There was no bitterness in it, just a flat acknowledgement. Leonard's a straight shooter, I said. Always has been. He didn't defend me. No, I said. He didn't. She stood there another moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I know what I did to Caden was wrong. With the school. I knew it when I was doing it. She paused. I convinced myself it was fine. I looked at her across the kitchen. He sat in that dormitory asking if you'd called. 11 weekends. She didn't answer. She went upstairs. I stayed at the table until midnight, then checked on Caden, turned out the lights, and went to bed. Her family hadn't chosen sides. They'd done something more useful. They'd seen clearly, and they'd said so out loud. December came in cold and fast. Dale Whitmore called me on a Monday morning with 2 pieces of news. The first was expected. Kristen Farlow had formally withdrawn from Colette's case following the conflict of interest determination. Gary Flemish was now handling everything, which meant Colette had lost her inside advantage, the friend who knew the story from both sides and could help her shape the narrative. Flemish was competent, but he was working without context. The second piece of news was less expected. Spencer Rowe, Dale said, has ended contact with your wife. I leaned back in my chair. Based on what we're hearing through the financial picture, the transfers stopped approximately 3 weeks ago. Our investigator also confirmed he's no longer reachable at the number she'd been using to contact him. She know why. She may not know the full reason yet, Dale said carefully, but I'd expect she'll find out shortly. She found out on a Wednesday. I didn't witness it directly, but I heard it, Colette in the guest room, voice low and controlled at first, then with an edge that came through the wall. A phone call that lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, the house went completely silent for a long time. I gave her space. I wasn't interested in rubbing anything in. I had bigger things to manage. But 2 weeks later, Kirk called me. He'd heard something through a mutual acquaintance from the old County Fire Network. People talk in small circles, and Spencer Rowe had apparently moved on with considerable speed. He was seeing someone new, a woman named Deborah Hale, married, living out in Stanton County, a peripheral acquaintance of Colette's from a charity event 2 years back. I sat with that information for a day before deciding what to do with it, which was nothing. It wasn't my battle. What it told me was something I'd already suspected. Spencer Rowe hadn't been in love with Colette. He'd been in the habit of her. And when the habit became inconvenient, he found a new one. Colette found out about Deborah Hale on her own, through the same social channels that carry everything eventually. I was in the garage changing the oil on my truck when she appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment without speaking. "Did you know?" she asked finally. "About the new woman?" I glanced up. "I heard something. About 2 weeks ago. And you didn't tell me." "Colette," I said carefully, "you haven't been my responsibility for a while now." She absorbed that. "She's someone I know." "I know," I said. She stood there another moment. I expected anger. At him, at me, at the situation. What came instead was something quieter and harder to watch. Not grief exactly. More like the specific humiliation of realizing you dismantled something real for something that was never going to hold. "He wasn't worth it," she said. Not to me, more to herself. I didn't respond to that. I went back to the oil filter. She left the doorway. I finished the job, cleaned my hands, and stood there in the cold garage for a moment thinking about 16 years. The early ones, when things had been good. The middle ones, when I'd been too busy to notice the slow drift. The last two, when I'd been blind to something that was right in front of me. None of that changed what I needed to do now. Dale's assessment was that Colette's negotiating position had weakened significantly. The financial misconduct review at her workplace had expanded, which meant she was under pressure from two directions simultaneously. He expected her to move towards settlement before the next court date. She did. Her attorney contacted Dale's office on a Thursday afternoon and requested a settlement conference. I told Dale to set it up. I wasn't going to fight for the sake of fighting, but I was going to walk out of that conference with my son, my finances intact, and my life pointed in a direction I'd chosen. Spencer Rowe had walked away first. That was the best thing he'd ever done for me, even if he'd done it entirely for himself. The settlement came together in the second week of January. Dale had predicted Colette would move quickly once the workplace review expanded, and he was right. The financial misconduct inquiry at her firm hadn't cost her the job. Not yet, but it had cost her leverage, credibility, and any remaining appetite for a prolonged court fight. She got the car, her retirement account, and a portion of the joint savings. I got the house, primary custody of Caden, and the return of $14,200 from the disputed transfers. The remainder was deemed too difficult to trace without a formal forensic audit that would have cost both of us more than it was worth. Dale called it a solid outcome. I called it the starting line. Colette moved out on a Saturday. She had help, 2 women I didn't recognize, and a rental truck. I took Caden to the hardware store that morning, then to lunch, then to a sporting goods store where he'd been eyeing a particular jacket for 2 months. We came home in the early afternoon to a house that felt different, lighter somehow, like a pressure system had finally moved through. Caden stood in the front hallway and looked around. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Is it always going to be just us?" For a while, I told him, "That okay?" He thought about it seriously, the way he considered most things. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." We spent the rest of the day rearranging. He wanted his desk by the window instead of against the wall. We moved a bookshelf from a spare room into his. I ordered pizza for the 3rd time that month, and we ate it standing at the kitchen counter, talking about whether he wanted to finish the semester at Ridgemont or transfer to Franklin High in February. He chose Franklin High. The enrollment paperwork took a week. His first day was a Monday in mid-February, and I drove him myself, which I hadn't done since he was 10. He was quiet on the way over, nervous, though he wouldn't say so. I pulled up to the front entrance, and he grabbed his bag. "You're going to be fine," I said. He gave me the half nod that meant he knew I was right, but wasn't ready to admit it yet, and climbed out. I watched him walk through the front doors without looking back. That was a good thing. It meant he was moving forward. Kurt came by that evening with a 6-pack, and we sat on the back porch even though it was cold enough that we could see our breath. He asked how it felt, having the house to ourselves. "Quieter," I said, "but the right kind of quiet." He nodded and opened his bottle. "You did right by that kid, Conrad." "I'm doing my job," I said. That's all. That was true. And for the first time in a long time, the job felt manageable. 8 months after Colette moved out, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It turned out to be a woman named Janet Reeves, a fire safety coordinator with the state insurance board. She'd found my name through a professional referral and wanted to discuss a consulting arrangement, reviewing commercial properties across the county for a quarterly rate that was considerably better than my county salary. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 2 days and then said yes. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was mine, something I'd built without anyone else's input or interference, from a referral that came because I was good at what I did. Caden was thriving at Franklin High by spring. He joined the engineering club, made 2 friends I'd actually met, and started talking about college with a specificity that told me he was thinking seriously about his future for the first time. His grades had gone up. He slept in his own bed in his own room every night and came downstairs in the morning and made himself breakfast like a person who belonged where he was. Colette's workplace review concluded in March. She wasn't terminated, but she was formally reprimanded and moved to a non-supervisory role. I heard this through Kurt, who heard it through a mutual contact. I didn't ask for details. Whatever consequences she faced were between her and the choices she'd made. Spencer Rowe was still seeing Deborah Hale, from what little filtered back through Kurt's network. Whether that situation would hold, I had no opinion on. I had enough to manage without tracking the orbit of a man who'd never been worth my attention in the first place. Colette and I interacted only when Caden was involved. School events, the occasional handoff. It was civil, sometimes almost comfortable, in the way that things become comfortable when the fighting is over and you've both accepted the landscape. One evening in late September, I was sitting on the back porch after dinner, listening to the neighborhood settle into quiet, when Caden came out and sat in the other chair. He had his phone in his hand, but wasn't looking at it, just sitting. After a while he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me. In the truck, that day you picked me up." "Which part?" I asked. "That none of it was my fault." He paused. "I think I actually believe that now." I looked at him. He was 15, nearly, and he looked like himself, not the careful, guarded version that had come home from Ridgemont, but the actual version, the one that had been waiting underneath all that time. "Good," I said. "That's where it belongs." We sat there until the light was gone. I thought about the night in October when I'd come home to a black Audi in my driveway and a wife who'd told me to go back inside. I thought about the choice I'd made in that moment, not to fight, not to collapse, but to step back, take inventory, and do the job that needed doing. I'd spent 19 years reading scenes, reading what didn't belong, finding what was about to go wrong, getting there before the damage was done. I'd been late to this one, but I'd gotten there. And sitting on that porch with my son beside me, watching the last light leave the sky, I knew with certainty that what I'd kept from the wreckage was the only thing that had ever really mattered.